this segment, Seth Rich Rises Again, is really the most amazing unfolding story in Washington. And I want to give a little bit of background just to remind you, in case if you're thinking that name Seth Rich sounds familiar, who is that? Back in 2016, during the election cycle, Seth Rich was a young man who worked at the DNC, the Democrat National Committee. He happened to be a supporter of Bernie Sanders. And at that time, of course, the primary is still ongoing. Seth Rich was murdered, most unfortunately, very sadly, in June of 2016, very early morning, late night, early morning. He was shot in the back in a neighborhood where he lived. And the investigation, the police looked into it and they ended up calling it a robbery gone bad, even though nothing was stolen. He saw his watch, his wallet, everything intact. And he was shot in the back. And the police just called it unfortunate and let it go. But many people were very, very suspicious about that. And then, tied at happening at the same time, you may recall at that time in 2016 that there were emails that were somehow being obtained from inside the DNC server, the Democrat National Committee server, and the Clinton campaign server. And those emails have been given to Julian Assange, who runs WikiLeaks. So Julian Assange, running WikiLeaks, put these emails out, and they came out. There was just an avalanche of them, one after the next, for weeks and weeks. And essentially, they helped America see how completely creepy Hillary Clinton is. The point of today's story is not the details, what was in the WikiLeaks emails, but they made the DNC look really bad. And the DNC then complained about it, of course. I mean, it made Hillary look terrible and just creepy. It's really bad. And the DNC, instead of turning their servers over to the FBI, who still to this day has never been able to examine the DNC servers, but the DNC permitted an organization called CrowdStrike, a private organization connected to Hillary, to do this cyber investigation, to look into their computers and figure out how did all these emails get out of the DNC, super secret server and into the hands of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks and out to the world. CrowdStrike announced that they had discovered that this was a hack by the Russians, that this was a hack into the server, obviously making Hillary look bad. So therefore, probably they were alluding to probably somehow connected to Trump or at least connected to Russia. So all of what we were treated to in the entire Trump-Russia collusion hoax, everything that happened inside the DNC and happened inside Washington and the investigation of the FBI, the DOJ, a lot of it centered around or sprang out of this argument that the Russians had hacked the Democrat National Committee's server. But many actual investigators, people skilled and talented, looked at the information publicly available. And I'm not a DNC, I'm not a computer sleuth, but experts looked at it and said, no, this information could not have been removed from the DNC servers by a remote hack because of the speed of the download. The information, the emails that came out of the servers had to have been taken by someone who is inside the DNC, taken and loaded onto flash drives or some other instant way of downloading things rather than a hack. And in 2016, a Fox reporter woman her brother had represented Julian Assange and she had met with him while he was holed up in London in the I think it was the Bolivian embassy. And she said afterwards on national television that Julian Assange told her that the emails he got from the DNC did not come from the Russians. Did not come from the Russians. He affirmatively said, Julian Assange said he did not get the emails from the Russians. So he's right there putting the kibosh on the whole idea that the Russians somehow hacked into the DNC server. Following up from that, this same reporter contacted a gentleman who lives here in Dallas, Ed Butowski, who's a longtime friend of hers. And she told him, her name was, I'm trying to get her name quickly, I think it was Ellen Ratner, but whatever her name was, Ratner anyway. She told Ed Butowski, who's been on this show many times, or twice, she told Ed Butowski that what Julian Assange had actually said to her was that the emails came to him from this young man, Seth Rich, and his brother Aaron. So Assange is identifying, he knows where he got those emails that he put out on WikiLeaks. They didn't come from the Russians hacking. They came from inside the DNC, Seth Rich, and that Seth Rich and his brother have been responsible for downloading those and sharing them with WikiLeaks. One possible motive attributed to Seth Rich doing this to his own employer may have been because he supported Bernie Sanders and didn't like watching inside the DNC all the support being tossed by the DNC manipulatively behind the scenes to Hillary Clinton to bring about her defeat of Bernie Sanders in the primary. So Ratner has already said on live television, so you can, and we played the clip before, that Assange told her that the emails didn't come from the Russians, they came from inside the DNC. And then Butowski says, yeah, she told me they came from Seth Rich. So fast forwarding. So first of all, it's important to understand how consequential that is when you think about the fact that it is often pointed to as one of the, everyone knows the Russians tried to hack or tried to sway the 2016 election. Look what they did. They hacked inside the DNC server. They put stuff out there that made Hillary look bad. So therefore, that must prove that the Russians wanted Trump to win, that they were on Trump's side. They were trying to hurt Hillary. Recent discovery, will remind you, is that in fact, documents now out and available and being discussed are that the actual fact is John Brennan, head of CIA, was squelching the information they were gathering in 2016, which were telling him the Russians were not on Trump's side. If anything, their intelligence was steering them to the understanding the Russians wanted Hillary to win, which is what I've always said. But back to the Seth Rich story and what's happening now. So Seth Rich, that's become just an unsolved case, and the police just toss it up to a, who knew? I guess it was just a robbery gone bad, even though nothing was stolen. So here we are today. We've been talking about how the House Intelligence Committee, that these documents were released finally after being held back for so long, that it's now evident that despite what Washington has said, what the media's tried to say, what the DNC has tried to say, that there actually was an investigation, some level of investigation in Washington about whether or not Seth Rich was really the one. Seth Rich, who was murdered, was really the one who got the emails off the DNC server via a flash drive or something and gave them to WikiLeaks. And of course, much speculation, if that is true, if Seth Rich was the one taking these emails, then, it raise all sorts of questions. And who murdered him? Who and whose interest, whose interest did his death serve? Because he was a Bernie Sanders supporter, not a Hillary supporter. He's giving away information, making Hillary look bad. Your head could go a lot of directions. But what's happening today is there's a lawyer based in New York, Ty Clevenger, and he represents Ed Butowski. Ed Butowski, the Dallas person who's been on this show a couple times. And Butowski is the one who, when Ellen Ratner told him that Assange had told her it came from Seth Rich and Aaron Rich, that Butowski, based on the specific instruction given to him by Ratner, he says Ellen Ratner told him that Julian Assange wanted Seth Rich's parents to know, once he'd been murdered, wanted them to know what happened. Julian Assange is saying, I got these emails from Seth Rich and now he's been murdered. I think his parents ought to know that I got the emails from him. So Butowski goes, he tells Seth Rich's parents, that this what Julian Assange is saying. Seth Rich's parents, being diehard Democrats, hate all Republican type people, don't want to accept this. They don't want to have the idea of their son, his memory tarred in any way by supposedly having been doing this to the DNC. So they're not on board with the story, but Butowski, what Ratner told them to do, went and had that conversation with Seth Rich's parents. So lots of litigation flying around among a variety of people irrelevant to this story. But what I want to get to today is this. So now Ty Clevenger, the lawyer for Butowski, has sent an email, a regular letter. You can read it online. You can read it at my website, americacanwetalk.org. On the homepage under shows, drop down list of links. You can read all the stories I'm talking about. But Ty Clevenger has sent a letter today, now on May 7th, to Richard Grinnell, who is the interim director of of National Intelligence, DNI. So Grinnell is the interim DNI director. Clevenger is saying to him, look, guy, I want the information that you may have in your possession related to the whole Seth Rich case, and that specifically the investigation that actually did happen, despite the effort of everyone in Washington trying to say there was no investigation. We didn't have to look into Seth Rich. That poor young man was murdered in a random street crime. You know, it had nothing to do with anything related to the campaign and his work at the DNC. So here's what Clevenger is now saying to Grinnell. He's saying, number one, I represent Ed Butowski. He's my client. And he lists all the cases involved. There's a bunch of litigation going on. And he says, in this case, he said, first of all, Julian Assange strongly inferred Mr. Rich rather than Russian hackers were responsible for the emails being released. And he said, and this is now Clevenger, what he's telling DNI Grinnell, I am reliably informed that the NSA or its partners intercepted at least some of the communications between Mr. Rich and WikiLeaks. So there would be evidence, you understand, if Seth Rich is the one grabbing the emails and he's sending them to WikiLeaks, there'd be some electronic record, and that's what he's getting at. I'm reliably informed that the NSA or its partners intercepted at least some of the communications between Mr. Rich and WikiLeaks. Before elaborating on that, however, I want to first note the extent to which the deep state has already tried to cover up information about Seth Rich. In October 2018, in an affidavit submitted in a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, FBI Section Chief David Hardy testified, number one, FBI did not investigate any matters relating to Mr. Rich. So you have the FBI section chief saying that the FBI never investigated anything related to Mr. Rich. And number two, FBI unable to locate any records about Mr. Rich. And this guy, Ty Clevenger, in his note to DNI Grinnell is saying that was a lie. Now we all know the FBI guy lied. The section chief, David Hardy, lied. He says last September, Judicial Watch, September 2019, Judicial Watch inadvertently obtained records about Mr. Rich by requesting communications between FBI lawyer Lisa Page and supervisory agent Peter Strzok. And he says the header in a heavily redacted email string shows the name Seth Rich. And in one email, Agent Strzok boasts about having squashed something pertaining to Mr. Rich. So now you have the FBI who's lied through their teeth about going after Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, lied through their teeth, making up stuff, concocted the whole Trump-Russia collusion. Now Clevenger is pointing out that even documents that were obtained with respect to other litigation is pointing out that the FBI did indeed investigate Seth Rich. In fact, this Strzok guy is bragging that they squashed something pertaining to him. And then he also says, Clevenger is saying in March of this year, he deposed Assistant U.S. Attorney Deborah Sines, who was the prosecutor assigned to the Seth Rich murder case. She testified the FBI investigated a possible intrusion into Mr. Rich's electronic accounts. The FBI examined Mr. Rich's computer. The FBI did have records pertaining to Mr. Rich. So, folks, this is, it's an amazing thing. I always talk about in the show, you got to keep persisting. You keep pursuing the truth. What Clevenger is doing now on behalf of his client, Butowski, because Butowski was accused of lying, making up this stuff, that, when he went and gave the information that went from Julian Assange to Ellen Ratner to Butowski, and then he went and talked to Seth Rich's parents, he's been accused of lying. He's been just really his life and kind of raked over the coals, all because he relayed the message at the behest of his friend, Ellen Ratner. I meant to look up the dates I've had him on this show, but at one time he was on this show, Ed Butowski, gave a very detailed account of the entire interaction with Ellen Ratner and then with Seth Rich's parents. But this is a huge, huge story going to continue because I think, again, the FBI thinking they can just bury and hide things, not working out well as the tide is turning against the FBI and the entire Trump-Russia collusion hoax. And that, my friends, is today's First Five.